Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Are you ready to rock big savings? Rakuten's Big Give Week is a festival of savings with 15% cash back at hundreds of stores. We're talking 15% cash back at Expedia, Ray-Ban, Stanley, and more. Shoppers in the know get the best savings when they use Rakuten. They shop the brands they love and earn cash back on top of deals. Big Give Week is only once a year, and the cashback rates are through the roof. I'll be shopping for some new beauty products and home essentials while getting 15% cash back on it all. I get my cash back sent directly to my PayPal, and it feels so good whenever I see it hit my account. Join for free today and get a $20 welcome bonus. Hurry! Big Give Week ends May 12th, and there won't be an encore. Go to Rakuten.com or download the Rakuten app. That's RAKUTEN, Rakuten.com.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quests to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
When she turned up missing, I don't think it was surprising to a lot of people because, and this is, this whole murdered and missing Indigenous women, I think one of the parts that no one likes to talk about is it's not really always, it's not the woman who's doing great and she's like going to college and she just disappears one day, right? It's the women who are struggling, the women who get involved in sex work and drugs and are around bad people. Those are the ones that are most prone to disappear because their life is not valued by whether it's a domestic partner or these sort of bad people she's hanging around with. And so the mental illness part of it, the drugs part of it, is a contributor to missing people, to the epidemic of missing Indigenous people. It's not me that's going to go missing, right? It's the person on the reservation who's teetering on the brink. And the problem is there's no answers for people that find themselves in that position, or families who have loved ones who find themselves in that position. There's no legal remedy. There's no medical place to take these people to truly get them help. So it's sort of this revolving door between jail, the behavioral health, lockdown facility that only keeps you for 48 hours. No one forces them to get on medication or counseling, and it just gets worse and worse until something terrible happens. And so that's why I say it wasn't shocking, because at the end, it was really bad. And so when she did go missing, it was sadly predictable in a sense.
That's Victorio Shaw, a tribal judge from California. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Humboldt County is a sprawling mountainous Northern California coastal county known for a wide variety of things related to its remoteness. It's the place where the name Bigfoot was coined in 1958 after large footprints, later found to be fabricated, were attributed to a Sasquatch near Bluff Creek, which is close to the Trinity River in southern Humboldt County. It's also the home to Murder Mountain, which took its name in the 1980s from a serial killer couple, James Clifford Carson and Susan Barnes Carson, who killed someone in San Francisco and disappeared into the Humboldt County mountains between Alder Point and Gabberville, where they lived and worked on one of the many marijuana farms that are so common in the county, and they at least killed one person there. Murder Mountain was the name of a 2018 documentary on the marijuana industry and numerous murders and disappearances. In the documentary, one striking moment is when the narrator talks about how Humboldt County has more missing persons per capita than any county in the United States. This is perhaps apocryphal because it's hard to calculate the rate in the unorganized boroughs of Alaska. However, what is sure is that in 2023, the rate of missing persons in Humboldt County was astronomical. For example, that year in Alaska, the state with the highest rate, there were 41.8 missing persons per 100,000 people. Arizona, the second highest, had 13 people missing per 100,000. Oregon had 10 people missing per 100,000. By contrast, Humboldt County had 113.44 missing people per 100,000 people. In this county of 4,052 square miles, including many mountains and waterways, there are only 138,800 people, and there are 152 of them who are missing. What Murder Mountain doesn't capture, however, is that more than 5% of the people in Humboldt County are Indigenous. There are 8 reservations in the county, sovereign nations within the county. From the Wyatt, who live to the south in the Table Bluff Reservation, to the Cowart, who live 129 miles and a 3-hour and 10-minute drive away on the northeastern edge of the county. 2 reservations near the northwestern corner of the county, north of Murder Mountain and the Netflix documentaries, are the homes to the Hoopa and the Yurok. 300 miles away, Judge Victorio Shaw, a member of the Hoopa, presides as the chief judge of a tribal court for a different tribe, the Shingle Springs Band of the Mohawk Indians. The tribal court is designed to provide a culturally sensitive, independent judicial forum for members. California law allows tribes to retain some civil and criminal jurisdiction, and they're able to hear cases related to a wide variety of issues, from civil harassment cases to guardianships. Judge Shaw also works as an appellate judge for the Wilton Rancheria Appellate Panel. In addition to his work, Judge Shaw is also a relative of Emilee Risling, a 33-year-old mother and member of the Hoopa tribe who went missing on the Yurok Reservation. She was last seen, depending on who tells the story, crossing a bridge near where the Pequon Creek meets a river, or, in another telling, near the end of the same road to the north, near some homes and trailers. Emilee was an accomplished tribal dancer, and in a September 2004 article in the Washington Post, she was interviewed about visiting the opening to the Smithsonian's Museum of the American Indian. Clad in a Bob Marley shirt, Emilee goes shopping for footwear for the visit and explains the Hoopa dances to a visitor. She tells the visitor, no doubt the reporter writing the story, about the white deerskin dance that renews and restores balance to the world, the jump dance that wards off misfortune, the brush dance that helps the sick, and the flower dance that marks a girl's passage into womanhood. As Emilee grew into a woman, she began to build roots in her tribal community, but began to face postpartum mental health issues and had many interactions with law enforcement on the Hupa and Yurok reservations. Most of these interactions were minor, save one where she set fire to a tribal burial ground where family members said she thought she was helping. Her family says they had to ask for help for her many times because of her mental health, but this time she was taken to the county jail and charged with arson. After she left, Emilee traveled back to an area where the two reservations are, stayed with a friend who had been helping to take care of her, and then, one October day, disappeared. In 2021, the Yurok Tribal Council declared a state of emergency in response to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis after a spate of disappearances and attempts at sex trafficking. To understand the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people, it's hard to ignore the complicated relationship between natives in the United States and the justice system. It was not until 2021 that tribal police could detain someone who is not a tribal member. Even still, they lack the ability to charge and prosecute non-natives. If I was driving in a car with a dead body on a reservation in the back seat, a tribal police officer would need to call the state or local police in order to have me arrested and charged. It becomes more complicated when you get into the details. With murder on reservations, for example, the FBI has jurisdiction. Some reservations have tribal police departments. Others have the Bureau of Indian Affairs police officers who can be, but aren't always, deputized to enforce tribal laws. Jurisdictional issues abound, along with a genocide that began with first contact, and it feels like it's still continuing. Judge Shaw brings an interesting perspective as a tribal member, a tribal judge, and an attorney. He's an adjunct professor of federal Indian law at the University of California, Davis, and a specialist in the Indian Child Welfare Act, a 1978 law that the Supreme Court recently affirmed and that governs the removal and out-of-home placement of Native children with a focus on keeping their tribal bonds. In many ways, Judge Shaw has followed in the footsteps of his parents and his grandfather. He graduated with a law degree from the University of California, Davis, and obtained his bachelor's degree in fine arts from California State University, Humboldt. His mother was an artist and an educator, and his grandfather, David Risling Jr., helped create the California Indian Legal Service. Today, we're going to discuss Emilee's case, the disparities between the way that certain cases are treated in Indian country and other places, the challenges for the justice system that exists for Indigenous people and on reservations, law enforcement, the cross-jurisdictional issues in different systems, mental health, and other topics that play a role in opening tribal lands to things like domestic violence, predators, and other problems. And we're also going to discuss finding a better way. So, Victorio, I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast, and I want to give credit to one of my listeners, Chris, who actually heard you on another podcast called Floodlights and, brought up the idea that I should really connect with you one way or the other, whether it's for the podcast or for some other reason, because we spent a lot of time last year on the podcast focusing on both challenges and the beauties of Indigenous communities. And I thought, just in listening to that episode with you, you brought a really interesting perspective. And the more I read about you, the more interesting I realized it actually was. So I want to thank you for, being willing to have the conversation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here. And I'm always excited to provide my perspective on Indian country. I think it's one of the duties that was instilled in me by my grandfather. That sort of we have a duty to educate people who are curious, because we need people to better understand where we come from and who we are, because there's a lot of misconceptions about Native people and Native issues.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point. I remember I was visiting a tribe last year, and one of my questions was, how do I, as an outsider who cares, right, cares on a human level, how do I help? How do I learn? And at the same time, respect uh, your culture. Is there advice you give to people who are trying to understand and help? Because, and I get it, like, when I receive help from people, it's a delicate balance, right? Because you don't want to be patronizing. You want to be respectful of people's cultures and their perspectives. Is there any advice you give to people who are curious?
Yeah, certainly. I'm someone who appreciates um, people who are curious about Native people and who come from a genuine place. So that's the first thing I would say is come from a genuine place and listen more than speak, um, and show that you have sort of a genuine desire to learn. And I think if you connect with the right people, they're happy to spend some time and educate folks who come to us in the right way. Certainly, taking classes, if you're someone who's in college or has access to some sort of Native American studies class taught by a Native person, that's a tremendous way to learn. So I think just wanting to be more informed is a great thing. And I think, if you meet someone and they don't open up to you, don't be discouraged, because there are people, educators, elders, tribal leaders who will take the time to have a conversation with people who approach them, heart first, I would say.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea of like coming at it from a genuine, genuine place, and and probably I would imagine like a willingness to admit what you don't know, and because it requires going into like some measure of discomfort for some people, I think, but it's very rewarding. You had mentioned your grandfather before,
Yeah.
who's really well known, and I know your grandfather, your mom, your dad, all in sort of different ways had some significant impact. And so maybe I'll start by just asking a little bit about them and a little bit about what growing up was like for you.
Yeah. So my grandfather, David Risling Jr., he's passed on, but he's looked at as the father of Indian education. If you look at his Wikipedia page, he did so much for Native people and education in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He started the first Native American college in California. He was the first member of our tribe to get a college degree. He was a lieutenant commander in World War II of a Navy vessel. He helped create the Native American Rights Foundation, California Indian Legal Services, the National Indian Education Association, and many other things. But he primarily taught for 30 years at UC Davis in the Native American Studies department. And him, along with Jack Forbes, really built that program into one of the only programs in the country that offers up to a PhD in Native American Studies. And so he really moved a lot and was there at the table for a lot of big discussions and meetings that happened when, tribes were fighting for our civil rights and Native people. But all of that really stems from his father, who, David Risling Sr., who escaped the boarding schools at the age of 13 and made his way to Canada to avoid being recaptured again and taken back to the boarding schools. And he worked in logging camps as a 13-year-old, making food for the loggers, playing his fiddle, and then returned to his tribe at the age of 18, so he couldn't be sent to the boarding schools. And he brought with him sort of this worldly knowledge, and he instilled that on all of his children, but especially in my grandfather. So when, he went away to the war and he went away to college, it was with the wisdom of my great grandfather, who really did a lot for his own tribe, including getting the first high school on the reservation and bringing back ceremonies and bringing back economic development to the tribe. So great men. And then my mother is a really well-known artist in California. She's one of the most successful Native artists in California, Lynn Risling. And so her art, it's, you can look it up, lynnrisling.com, is really an explanation, a celebration, and a preserving of our culture. If you look at each one of her paintings, it teaches the viewer about our culture, our traditions, our ceremonies, our stories. And so she's really like preserved our culture and used it as a tool to teach people through her beautiful paintings. And so I'm kind of a mix. I have a art degree myself. I'm an artist, and my grandfather, he passed away when I was in my early 20s, and I really could think of no better tribute to his legacy than to go to law school and become an attorney and advocate for Native people.
Yeah, he had it was I thought of two things. He has such an interesting background in history, and then your mom both as an artist and an educator, and the power that art has to preserve and carry culture on is pretty astonishing. But I was reading, and I'm gonna butcher the name of it, but I think it was like the Journal of American Indian Higher Education. It was like Tribal College, something like that, or Tribal College Press. But they had done an interview with your grandfather, and one of the lines, it was either the headline that sort of summed it up, or maybe it was a line he said in there, said, "Don't forget who you are."
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so that is what his father told him when he went away, when he was going to go away to college. I mentioned, my grandfather was the first one to graduate from our tribe, and my great grandfather sort of brought him into the tool shed, and there was a wagon wheel, and he said, all of these spokes are your connection. The center is your tribe and where you come from. And as you go out into the world, you need to remember who you are and where you came from so that you don't get lost. And if you forget who you are, don't bother coming back. And so that led my grandfather to go out into the world with this philosophy of being able to walk in both worlds.
Right.
Which I would say he did more successfully than anyone prior to him from our area. And I'm fortunate that was passed on to my mother and then also to me. And so I attribute a lot of my professional success to that ability to walk in both worlds. And know who I am and where I came from, but also be a high functioning person in the modern world.
Looking for your best sleep ever? Sleep Number smart beds are literally made for you. They adapt to your changing needs. So whether you're dealing with sore muscles or running hot at night, your bed automatically adjusts for optimal comfort. Want softer, firmer, cooler, warmer? With personalized firmness settings and temperature control that cools up to 20 times faster than leading competitors, you'll get the perfect sleep environment every night. Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed? So you can choose your ideal comfort on either side. And now it's the Sleep Number Everything Smart Bed sale. Every smart bed and base are on sale during our Memorial Day event, up to 50% off, limited time, exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. See store or sleepnumber.com for details.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.
Right. That you almost grew up with, we think about it like sometimes people are limited by their beliefs about themselves when they're young, but you grew up with that belief that you could do that. And it also, another thing about your grandfather that really struck me, we were talking about that idea of curiosity and people being curious about native cultures. It seemed like he was very curious about everyone too. I had read about him going to Latin America, to New Zealand, to all sorts of other places to learn about other cultures. And it just made me think that that's like a very good model for what we were talking about at the beginning. So what was it like growing up for you? Where did you grow up and what did you imagine you would be doing this someday?
Yes and no. So I grew up about an hour west of my reservation. So the Hoopa Valley tribe is located in a very rural, kind of mountainous part of the state up in northwestern California, sort of Bigfoot country.
Yeah, Humboldt, right?
Humboldt County, yeah. And the only real, place to get a job was in the town of Arcata and Eureka, Arcata being where the university was. And so both of my parents ended up working for Humboldt State University. And so we lived on the coast is what people would refer to. And in summers, we spent summers on the reservation up until I was in school. And that created a little bit of identity crisis for me. I think, I was the proverbial, like, only Indian in my class oftentimes. And it was, uncomfortable at times, as anyone who's had that experience can relate to. And I think I went through my own periods of sort of self-doubt and wanting to be accepted and kind of struggling with that balance.
Kind of like, where do I fit in? Because I can think about that. Both my parents, similar to your story for your grandfather, both my parents were the first in their large families to go to college. So, they both came from southern rural communities. Wonderful families, great culture in both of their families, a lot of love. But so my brother and we grew up as my parents followed jobs in all white communities. And I can relate to that. There was this weird, and I don't know if you felt this thing, but as loving as my family members are, and they really are amazing, there was this weird feeling sometimes when we would go to visit them of not exactly fitting in there, but not exactly fitting in the school where we were one of the few or the only Black kids.
Yeah, it's the same feeling. I experienced that completely. And it wasn't until I became a man and that I was really able to get past that, or at least much older, like an older teenager. but I credit my parents for always taking me to the ceremonies and being part of the community. There was a large, like a greater community of Native people on the coast from different tribes. So we were always really involved in that, the clinic, and we would go to ceremonies on the reservation in the summer and fishing and all of those things. So I never questioned, whether or not I belonged, but it doesn't stop people from treating you at times like you don't belong. And so it wasn't really, till I got more educated and I felt I kind of grew into myself that wasn't an issue for me anymore, because I was really confident in who I am and where I came from. And
Yeah, I remember one of my cousins years later when we were adults who said that like some of that needling or ribbing was just really our own discomfort and understanding where
yes,
you were coming from and your experiences. And I thought that was just an interesting thing for me, because for me, I felt discomfort, right? And I felt that while still feeling loved, like totally loved. But I'd never really thought about the idea that as somebody who's gone out of the community and into the rest of a different part of the world, let's say, and that created some discomfort for them too.
yeah,
And I never really even thought of that part of it.
yeah, that's a great point. And really that's, that's the basis of all judgment, we'll call it, is that fear, that maybe you are less than somehow.
Yeah, no, I completely get that piece of it. So when you were younger, what were you thinking that you would do?
Well, I was always into art, so I that's something I always did, and I didn't really see it as a career path. I knew it was something that was an important part of my life, but sort of serendipitously, as I was nearing high school graduation, the whole .com revolution occurred. The internet exploded and revolutionized everything. And now there was really, I saw a potential avenue to become a professional artist in the way of graphic design and
Mm-hmm.
digital design. And so when I got to college, I dove head on into learning about technology, learning about web design, Photoshop, all of these things. So I was taking fine art classes and learning about, how to create digital everything. But prior to that, as I was, say, like a freshman, I lived through the whole O.J. Simpson trial and
Mm.
was completely fascinated by it. I would go home every day and watch it. Watch the hear-
We're a lot alike, my friend. I did the same thing. I was like in high school and college. I was in high school for the van, and then
uh
I think it was high school and college for the trial. Yeah.
and that is the first time I thought about becoming an attorney, because
Mhm.
I saw this thing that people call justice being sort of wielded by this really good attorney, and it didn't had more to do with his skill than with the facts, with justice, him being Johnny Cochran.
Right, right.
And regardless of what I think happened in the case and all of that, just to see a person of color um winning over a jury, getting another person of color off, so to speak.
Yeah. Or even just giving them a vigorous defense in a
Yeah,
world where you're not used to seeing fairness or even playing fields.
right.
Right.
It was like the great equalizer. And then I said,
Yep.
wow, what if I could do that for my people? If I could have those type of skills to advocate for my people, well, that would be incredible. And it's not something I see happening. So it it made me want to be an attorney. So up until that .com thing happened, I was dead set on becoming an attorney. But I gave way to my first love, which was art, once I saw an avenue to do that. And so I graduated with a degree, art degree, graphic design. I was working as a full-time graphic designer. And then I was working at a tribe with a casino doing their marketing and their graphic design. And I just saw all the problems.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
is this with your tribe or another tribe?
So I mentioned I grew up on the coast. Well, there was a tribe on the coast. So all the other native students that I went to school with, high school, most of them belonged to this tribe, the Trinidad Rancheria. And they were the first tribe to get a casino in Humboldt County. And because it was the first one, they were doing incredibly well. And the members started to get money. And I saw a lot of the tribal members around me at 18, 19 really kind of destroy their lives with drugs.
Yeah. And it's also hard because, the casinos in many places brought prosperity, they brought jobs, they brought economic benefit, but they also bring all the problems that you see coming with things like gambling or alcohol or all the other things. But also another thing, and I don't know if this played out for you all, because Humboldt has, a number of tribes there. But one thing that someone had said to me recently that, and they were giving an example of how checkerboarding separated their tribe into a bunch of different separate, now quote unquote separate tribes, but they're really all the same people. But he said, there was a point where, and there's that concept in federal law of blood quantum that's used to say, in the simplest term, how much of a tribe are you? And he said one of the things that they had been talking about was combining into one tribe because the way people are marrying from the quote unquote different tribes, blood quantum was going down, and that over time the tribe would eventually disappear because there wouldn't be enough. Because in the example he was giving, you wouldn't marry into your clan or have children inside your clan. So within your tribe, it had to be somebody else in another clan, right? So there are few opportunities that way. And what he said was, as soon as the first casino came, it completely changed one of the tribes and it decreased the desire to work together. And I thought, man, that is so sad. Like that such a good thing could bring something so bad.
Yeah, it's the proverbial double-edged sword. In that particular tribe's case, all these other casinos opened up, and then their money shrank, and so you had all these members who were receiving money and got used to just getting money, and then it all dried up. So now they had payments and drug addictions, and hadn't developed any, working skills. And so they were actually worse off than before. But to your point, where you're talking about, casinos in many instances have really continued on the government's policy of divide and conquer. It can prevent people within a tribe from coming together, and it does oftentimes, because there's this fight for leadership amongst the families to control the assets. Right. And then you have neighboring tribes who are essentially sort of what you described as really almost parts of the same tribe, larger tribe, at odds because they're competing. They have competing casinos. And so someone pointed out, I don't know if it was one of my classes early on, that wouldn't that be the cruelest trick, is if that, regulating casinos instead of Congress removing that right from tribes was somehow designed as an extension of termination, because tribes start to self-terminate almost by not coming together and by fighting and by disenrolling people.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you have like a good point. And historically, we've seen, if you look over the last 150 years in the United States, a lot of examples of things that, and I don't want to put this on all Americans, but that at least the United States government has sold to tribes as a good thing. Like even boarding schools were an example of,
right.
Or relocation from the reservations to large urban areas. All these things that were sold as good things that come to find out, or you realize relatively quickly, are either were not just bad things, but they were designed to be bad. So, like,
Yes.
I wouldn't call someone who offered that theory exactly paranoid. I would say you're really basing that on past
I agree.
evidence.
No, yeah, I love that you brought that up, because that is sort of the bonus lesson that I try to teach people when I have a class. I try to get them to see that every time that one of these horrible policies, laws was enacted over the course of federal Indian policy, every time it was sold to not only the Indians, but the rest of the government, the people, this is for their own good. This is in their best interest. And every time it comes out that it was actually designed to destroy them, but it's always sold to them in their best interest. And why do I try to point that out to people so much is because the same thing happens now to everyone.
Yep.
Nothing is ever going to be sold to you as, oh, this is going to erode your rights,
Culture, your rights, right?
It's going to weaken your bank, your ability to retire. It's always sold to you as a good thing, and I realize, kind of studying the history, like you're saying, it takes about 20 to 30 years before people realize that it was actually a nefarious plan the whole time. By then, it's too late. The people that experienced it, it's too far gone, and then the people who could actually make a better decision next time didn't live through it, so they don't make the right choice to stand up against it.
Right. And then they're dealing with what the next thing is. And also, I think a part of it too that we don't, and I think this is another parallel between like Black culture and many Native cultures, is we're also carrying the trauma, right? Like the Jason who's sitting in front of you is carrying the trauma of my parents in the civil rights movement, my grandparents who were sharecroppers, and my grandfather's brother was lynched. Like we're carrying all of those things with us. And, it's funny because I see, like, when I see a strong Black person or a strong Native woman or a strong Native man, one of the first things I sort of think of is, wow, what a miracle it is that this person is standing in front of me on 2 feet. Like, how awesome is that? Because I do think one beautiful thing that you can say about our cultures, certainly your culture, is the resilience of your people is impressive. And I know we focus a lot on the problems because I think for a lot of us who care, we're problem oriented and we want to solve problems. But man, there are some beautiful lessons in there too.
Absolutely. I think that we're all sort of a living miracle if you really stop to think about it. The things that our ancestors had to endure for us to be having this conversation is astronomical. And as a modern day person, you really can't even fathom what that would have been like, the strength it would have taken to endure that, and the hope that it would all lead to something, a future, for their great grandchildren. And I really am thankful for that. And another thing I really try to emphasize, it's sort of how I wrap up the class, is that I don't see myself as a victim. I
Yeah,
don't think
no,
of my people as victims. I think of us as survivors, people who are strong and persevered. And I don't go through life identifying as a victim, because you can't stay in that mindset if you hope to heal and to overcome and to.
and also to recognize that suffering is universal. It's the
Yes.
one thing all humans, other than blood, skin, and water being in us, suffering is the one thing that I think we all have in common, and it can unite us. It's funny. I think of what you were saying, and I think about the miracle of you and me having this conversation. If you go generations and generations back, neither of us should be here.
Right.
Neither of us should be here. But it also sends me a message about like life is such a gift, right? Like it required so many people, so many ancestors doing so much. Like it really is a gift.
Yeah, it sure is. And I think that's the most important thing I've learned as I've gotten older, that every day really, truly is a blessing. And if you can get in that mindset where you're living each day as a blessing, it's almost impossible to not be happy.
Yeah. So when I was reading about you and listening to the podcast, one of the things that came up was your cousin, Emilee Risling, who was from the Valley. And I wanted to sort of like research her life, even though, she ended up disappearing. And I tripped across this Washington Post article from, I don't know, it had to be, I don't know. I can't remember. It must have been in the 90s because it was the opening of or it was the 90s or early 2000s. I can't remember when it opened, but it was the opening of the National Museum of the American Indian, the Smithsonian Museum. And my dad was actually working at the Smithsonian at that point, which was kind of neat. Yeah, he was one of their first Black executives. There. And, one of the really kind of cool things in the article, she was like featured. She gave a good chunk of things. And it reminded me of the thing that you were saying about art, because she talked about culture and the dances, because she was an accomplished dancer. And, it just reminded me, I think, and I always like to do this whenever I'm talking about something where something tragic has happened to someone. I like to talk about their life. So I was wondering if there's anything about Emilee or the culture in the Valley and the community that you want to share.
Yeah, she was younger than me. And so I didn't get to spend as much time with her as some of my other cousins. But she was sweet and kind and just beautiful. She was like the epitome of a beautiful Native American woman. Like if you just were to picture in your head, that's who she was. And kind, really was a very important person for my great aunt. So my grandfather's youngest sibling, she's outlived everyone by at least a decade. And so Emilee really got close to her and absorbed a lot of that knowledge, that cultural knowledge from my aunt Viola before she passed. And they almost became like best friends. And they really treasured each other. And I think when my Aunt Viola finally passed on in her 90s, I think that's when Emilee's life sort of took a turn. That was kind of her rock, and
She lost her anchor a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, she was really a sweet person, and just could light up the room with her smile, and really down to earth, really, really cool, great sense of humor. She got her degree from University of Oregon. And
I saw a picture of her on a panel at the University of Oregon. It was the Native Student Union. And, speaking of sort of like your grandfather's work, and they were doing an educational event for other students, and they were talking about different Native American cultures, and they don't have a video of it, but there's some articles on it. And I saw her, and she looked very confident in the picture, and it just sounded like her life was so promising. If you think of like, she might be in your generation, or you might consider it one generation down, but you had, you were, let's see, your grandfather was the first who went to college, and then, to see somebody, I imagine by then people were taking pride in seeing people do so well.
Yeah, yes and no. There's still a lot. I mean, the Hupa Valley it's one of the largest reservations in the state, and so it's also one of the poorest and most depressed. And so the percentage of people who are doing well is a pretty small percentage, and so you still have a lot of people who have a hard time rooting for each other.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, there wasn't like, oh, good for you, cousin, respect, like, I can't wait to see what you do with your life. There's a little bit of that. You think you're better than me.
Yes, I got that.
Thing, going on.
Right. Yeah, I got that.
But, like I said, when my aunt passed away, she started to go downhill about getting into drugs and just hanging out with bad people, or less than great people. And, because she was beautiful, those types of people were more than happy to try to take advantage of her. And eventually it became pretty obvious that she had some mental health issues, some serious mental health issues. I don't know if that preceded her drug use, or that was brought on by her drug use, or some combination.
They kind of go in combination, I think, for a lot of people. Yeah.
But, in her last, I would say 2 or 3 years, it was just one after another incident with her cries for help. She, lost custody of her son. And once she kind of didn't have that other, that would have been like her other
anchor. Yeah.
Then she just kind of totally, it was a precipitous decline after that. And when she turned up missing, I don't think it was surprising to a lot of people. Because, and this is, this whole murdered and missing Indigenous women, I think one of the parts that no one likes to talk about is it's not really always, it's not the woman who's doing great and she's like going to college and she just disappears one day, right? It's the women who are struggling, the women who get involved in sex work and drugs and are around bad people. Those are the ones that are most prone to disappear because their life is not valued by whether it's a domestic partner or these sort of bad people she's hanging around with. And so the mental illness part of it, the drugs part of it, is a contributor to missing people, to the epidemic of missing Indigenous people. It's not me that's going to go missing, right? It's the person on the reservation who's teetering on the brink. And,
yeah.
There's the problem is there's no answers for people that find themselves in that position, or families who have loved ones who find themselves in that position. There's no legal remedy. There's no medical place to take these people to truly get them help. So it's sort of this revolving door between jail, the behavioral health, lockdown facility that only keeps you for 48 hours. No one forces them to get on medication or counseling, and it just gets worse and worse until something terrible happens. And so that's why I say it wasn't shocking, because at the end, it was really bad. And so when she did go missing, it was sadly predictable in a sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think you're like hitting on sort of a core point, right? It's not like Indigenous people carrying some trauma, just like Black people and many other groups. But it's not as if there's anything unique that causes them to go missing. But when you really, like, the way you described it just sort of crystallized it. We all have people in our communities who struggle, who need support. They need rehab, they need mental health help, or they need assistance from the police, right? That's another example. But when you're in a really rural area where, unlike where I'm sitting in Northern Virginia suburbs, and if I call the police, they'll be through this door in 90 seconds, not literally, but like 3 minutes, right?
Right.
When you have to wait 45 minutes to get an ambulance, when there aren't mental health facilities or community mental health therapists. I have an Indigenous friend who's a mental health therapist, and to me, I love that more than I think anyone's job that I own. I'm so glad she's there and doing that. But when you don't have that mental health support, when you don't have that substance abuse treatment, when law enforcement is far apart, not only is there greater risk for the women that we're describing in that situation, there's a greater risk that other people around them are sick and not getting the help they need. So you have this combustible situation where you have vulnerable people who are sick and not getting the help that they need, surrounded by other people who are sick, not getting the help they need. It almost feels like there's an inevitability, and you described it like that description you gave, where people are in this revolving door of trouble. And then I just imagine that some of them shoot off the revolving door and disappear or otherwise harm. Is there something like, do you think that there's something to that idea of part of the challenge is that these resources don't exist, and maybe part of the solution to this problem isn't purely a law enforcement one, but also a resources and health related one,
100%.
an opportunity related one? Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
If I have sort of like a cause to champion, it is the lack of people who can and are willing to do the type of work you just described in Indian country. We don't have enough counselors, enough psychiatrists, enough substance abuse experts that are able, willing to come into Indian country and do this work. The tribe doesn't have enough resources to hire them. There aren't people who can do this work that also understand the historical trauma of Native people and the socioeconomic issues of the reservation. And so it's really an epidemic of behavioral health across Indian country. And if I could do one thing, it would be to encourage, the Congress, gaming tribes, the states, all of the above, to not just, devote resources to this, but incentivize young people to go into this line of work, to want to do it, to have a pathway to come back to the reservation and to do this work on the reservation for their people. So that 20 years from now, we might see a decline, a significant decline in all of these issues that we're talking about. So the tribe I do work with has one of the best infrastructures for mental health. And I see what a difference it makes. Conversely, I work for my own tribe who has a tribe of 3,000 who has less resources than the tribe of 300. Trying to have the same impact and can't really even make a dent in the problem.
Wow. I didn't even think of that piece of it. And is it because of gaming that the tribe that you work for as a judge is in a better position?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to stop here for now, and we'll be back in a few days. Thanks for joining us for this first of 2 episodes with Judge Victorio Shaw. If you're interested in learning more about the beauties and the struggles of Indigenous communities, go to our website or Patreon, where you can click on the tags that will take you to our collections of episodes on these important topics. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For those of you who are interested in true crime, you can check out our new publication, The True Crime Times, on Substack. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. That's where you'll also find early and ad-free episodes. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again soon.